told you so, because neither of us wanted this guy here. There were also 21 other teams that decided to pass in that first round, and
yes.
On this can't miss talent. So we have to sit here and chuckle a little bit under our breath and say, okay, this is kind of working out the way we thought that it might. Could he develop into a serviceable NFL quarterback? Maybe a backup. I see him as a backup at best. I want to make sure I say, too, that I don't necessarily want to throw Justin Gilbert into this three knuckleheads category so quickly. I think Justin Gilbert still can be coached and massaged into being a talented NFL cornerback. I'm not ready to give up on the kid. I don't know. I didn't hear the same kind of me attitude, the same kind of malcontent stuff, and the same kind of, maybe there was some poor practice habits, and maybe there was a little bit of entitlement mentality in Justin Gilbert as well, but that didn't come through as strongly as the other two characters.
I agree.
So maybe let's just separate him a little bit from those other two knuckleheads and say, well, let's not necessarily throw him on the scrap heap. I did think about one thing, though, Jerry, and it was just as I'm sitting there waiting on hold about Manziel trying to orchestrate his way out of Cleveland. You remember when he was quoted at Texas A&M that he couldn't wait to get out of College Station? There was a quote that he can't wait to get out of here. Talking about going pro before his eligibility was up. And the quote was that he couldn't wait to get out of College Station. Well, I think maybe College Station was ready to be done with him as well. So maybe this is a situation where a kid who wears out his welcome then gets the message and says, I can't wait to get out of here. Well, I think you can maybe make the parallel to the Cleveland situation here. He can't wait to get out of Cleveland because, frankly, he's worn out his welcome here in a lot of respects. The thing yesterday, and as I told you, I was out of town and catching the game on an NFL ticket, direct TV kind of feed, and was able to watch the game. And I saw him on the field, and I thought to myself, I have never in my life seen a player
I know where you're going.
on the field during warm-ups in t-shirt and sweatpants or whatever with his smartphone in his hand, double thumb texting someone or another. And then you told me earlier off air that he was actually favoriting tweets during the game, not an hour before the game on the field, but he was actually on his phone texting, tweeting something during the game, and that just blows my mind. I can't even believe it.
In all fairness, it was from the locker room. What had happened was, for those of you guys that didn't hear this part of the story, what Dan's talking about happened before the game. He was on the field in pregame warmups. I think some of that footage was on, when they show guys warming up for the game or whatever, and he had the phone. Then, actually, him and Gilbert were both removed from the sidelines during the game and sent back to the trainer's room for the reasons that haven't been specified. And apparently while Manziel was in the trainer's room, I believe it was during the second quarter of the game, fans who follow him on Twitter saw him favoriting tweets as some stuff about Chris Rock or something like that, and couldn't believe it. And then he went in today and unfavorited them, so you can't go back and see the timeline of it or whatever. Whatever activity he did during the game has been undone today so that you can't go back and see it. But it was verified. Some people screen capped it and stuff like that. And again, talk about unheard of. The cat it's one thing if you're injured and you're at home and it's bad enough that you're not paying attention to what your team is doing. But, to be at the game on the sidelines and then removed from the sidelines and sent back during the game, and you're on your Twitter timeline, and Facebook and stuff. Again, those are, not only is that a bad look, but those are the reasons why I think even the most hardcore Manziel monk right now would have to understand why Cleveland would not be crazy to just let somebody else develop that problem. Let you take the risk and you reap the reward, because I think the Browns are such a fragile franchise as far as they're just now trying to build a stable foundation of solid coaching and solid fundamentals that you're not, say the Patriots, you're not a stable organization that can put a landmine inside yourself, and if it blows up, you can support it. You can deal with it and then not die. If you put a landmine inside the Cleveland Browns, you'll blow the whole thing up because they don't have any foundation yet of veterans and leadership and winning.
Yeah, that's true, and I think we're talking about, you liken it to, you can't really say that the Browns have had, quote unquote, the inmates running the asylum, because they really haven't had over the 16 years since they came back the kind of high profile LeBron-esque kind of personality player. But you have seen management walking on eggshells a little bit and tiptoeing around, and it's good to see, and you and I kicked this around a little bit earlier too, Pettine after the game, refusing to even talk about these guys, basically saying that would be insulting or disrespectful to the Browns players who pulled on the uniform today and actually went out and played and followed the rules to the extent that they were allowed to do that. And it would be disrespectful to talk about the Johnny thing or the Justin Gilbert thing after the game when Gar competed, against a decent football team and led them going into the fourth quarter. Yes, they folded the tent in the fourth quarter, and the Ravens found a way to win it, but they went out and competed hard, and like you say, that may have been the thing that saved Mike Pettine. I don't know if it really would have come down to yesterday's game, but like you say, it certainly could have. We were afraid. I said 5 weeks ago that I thought the Browns were going to win one out of their last five because you could see the wheels kind of coming off. They ended up going 0-5 in that stretch, and that's certainly enough to change the mind of an aggressive owner like Jimmy Haslam to maybe pull the trigger. But he knew that stability is more important to this franchise right now than just about anything else. Absolutely. And to his credit, he let it ride.
Yeah, he did. And again, I'm not saying that was the total game changer, but I think if Jimmy Haslam had any internal questioning of himself or, oh man, am I sure that this is the right guy? Because as you said, he's aggressive. It's not just being meddlesome. It's like, hey, if I decide that this isn't the way we're going to go, I'm not going to wait a year. I'm just going to do it now because I'm not big on wasting time, which can be a bad thing or a good thing. But I agree with you there, man, is I thought that the team playing like that. And I want to say something. I'm going to go in, you and I were talking about this when you talk about what Mike Pettine said, because one of the players he pointed out is one that I pointed out at the beginning of today's show. And people love to go after Joe Hayden from time to time. They like to say he's overrated. They like to say he's overpaid. And at times I can get where you're coming from, but I also think in today's offensive league, Joe Hayden does a better job than people want to give him. People get incredibly picky with him. Now, I don't think he's the best in the league, but I do think he's top 5, and I do like Joe Hayden. But I like him a hell of a lot more after yesterday. This is a cat who just signed one of the biggest contracts in the NFL in the offseason. He's got some veteran status. It's in Cleveland. He's never won anything. I'm going to be fair about it, but he's got veteran status here in Cleveland. He missed last week, but he's been sick for the last 2 weeks. He's been hurt. He had the shoulder deal, and he was down with the flu. Like, they were joking, Michael Jordan flu game. This wasn't nothing of those stakes, but he was IV'd up and dragging himself out there just to play yesterday. It was the I think he did what he did yesterday as the anti-example of what we saw this weekend and this season from guys like Manziel and Gordon, and that is in a game where the best case scenario, you finish with 8 wins instead of 7. There's no tangible benefit to paychecks or cash. You're still going to be the starting cornerback next year. Nothing's going to change for Joe Hayden. He sucked it up and played. But then what I got more out of him yesterday was when he got hurt in the game. He made that great play near the goal line to break up. He spread eagled to get that ball, and when he landed, you could see he knocked the wind out of himself, and they were checking his knee. He went out for one friggin' play and checked himself back into that game and finished it off. And I'm just saying, I'm not telling you to build the Joe Hayden statue, but that is the example that you want 53 other guys on your football team to follow every single day.
Yeah, that's true. And the other thing that you can say about Hayden is that he is the consummate team guy on the field and off. He's a guy who did it right in terms of, call it PR, call it whatever you want to call it, but he came to town from Florida and embraced Cleveland and embraced Cleveland sports and embraced the Cavs and embraced the Indians and endeared himself to the fans right off the bat because he was a fan, became a fan of the area sports teams, not just the team, the franchise he played for. And has obviously been involved in all kinds of community activity and stuff in addition to being a Pro Bowler. So he's a Pro Bowler on the field, and however you personally rate him as a top 5, top 10 cornerback in the NFL, it doesn't really matter. He's a pro, and he's a pro on and off. And I think that you're right. Maybe he was especially motivated yesterday to show the young players and the free agents and the Joel Bitonio's, Terrence Wests of the league. Hey, man, this is how you do it when you're a first-year player in Cleveland, and this is the example that the first-year players ought to be following.
Same thing with Dansby. Dansby could have cashed it in and spent the last 2 weeks of the season on IR, like most guys most years do here in Cleveland, and he came back for 2 games that didn't mean anything. You know what I'm saying? But he came back. Those are the little differences that when if you're being honest and looking from the outside, you can see the beginnings of a foundation. For all that we joke, because it is a joke in the beginning part to say play like a Brown because of the way that they've played since '99, but when you get the true idea behind it, it's not meant to. Yeah, it's an easy one-line joke, but it's meant to signal an attitude and a mentality, and you are starting to see that from these guys. Look at, by the way, Joe Thomas. I loved him. He, after the game yesterday, speaking of these knuckleheads and their stuff, he said, "Hey, everybody's got some bad apples, but we and this is where I talk about telling comments and reading between the lines." Did you catch those comments from Joe Thomas and from Hayden and these other guys where they said, we talked to Jimmy after the game, and we know that we've got some bad apples, and some of these will be weeded out. And Whitner said, hey, they told me today that the ones that want to play will play. The ones that don't want to be a part of what we're doing will not be a part of this, that we're going to keep this thing moving. And I think that is something, again, for people that want, hey, I see Vashon in the chat room. I don't care about that. For people that go, who cares what Joe Thomas says? Who cares what the veterans say? Real football teams, real winning teams, they care what the veterans say, what the players say. They don't allow themselves to be dragged around by their nose just because a guy trademarked his name or because he was taken in the first round of the draft. I love the fact for the first time in forever, the Browns locker room is speaking out publicly about garbage that tanks their football team.
Yeah, that's true. It is refreshing to see. And the other thing, and you can say what you will about this 7 wins, and people saying already, well, next year you don't get to play the NFC South, and it's going to be tough. Well, you're still going to have the record, the schedule rather, of the 4th place team in the division.
No,
but I was watching that game last
year,
night a little bit, and let's say this team, 7 wins or no, and the combined record of the teams that the Browns beat, I read, was something like 40-some and 60-some. Decidedly losing record of those teams. But this team this past year kicked the butt of both of those 2 playoff teams that were up against each other last night for the championship. We took those teams 31-10 and 24-6 or something like that. We waxed both of those teams, one of them on the road, one of them at home. This Browns team kicked the Steelers' butt, kicked the Bengals' butt in 2 games this year, and played 2 very, very competitive games against the Baltimore Ravens, and should have won the home game 10 different ways. But what it shows you is, this team still has lots of holes. This team was decimated by the end of the year, but this team is a better roster than it was a year and 2 and 3 and 5 and 10 years ago. And, you can't forget that. You just got to realize that the team is improved and the team did play better. There were times this year when Mike Pettine showed that he was a rookie head coach in the NFL. Yes. Well, for the first time in 3 years or 4 years, next season we're not going to have a first-year NFL head coach at the helm. And you can take that to the bank too for whatever that's worth. So I just thought it was worth pointing out that the 2 teams that are both guaranteed playoff spots and that were fighting for the division title last year, each of those 2 teams got drilled by the Cleveland Browns this season, and that means this team's moving forward.
Yeah, and by the way, the whole division made the playoffs except the Browns, man. I mean, that'll show you,
right.
For those of you that question that division. A month ago, we were thinking, man, no way more than one team from this division makes it because they're going to beat each other up. Instead, they had 3 teams make it there, man. And you know what? I missed on something that you mentioned earlier when you said about Gilbert. I told you off the air that I 100% agreed with what you said. I separate him from this argument because, see, to me, the stuff that he's doing is typical rookie stuff is not being necessarily the most prepared for how hard you need to work to get ready for a football season in the NFL, for how hard. Yeah, and there's a difference between that and what. And I think people jump quickly in group, and I'm glad you pointed that out when you say, "Oh, well, Manziel wasn't prepared either." No, there's a difference. We're talking about completely unprepared. But anyways, regardless, with Gilbert